Good evening and welcome to the August 2021 Haverford Township Board of Commissioners work session. Mention that the board did meet an executive session on July 26th to discuss a legal matter. You also may notice that we're all wearing masks again about 4 o'clock. Since the start of the pandemic, the township has followed the CDC and state health department recommendations. CDC came out today, I think at 4 o'clock, saying that Delaware County had a spike and that was recommended that we all wear masks in public buildings, vaccinated or unvaccinated. Mr. Berman, would you call the roll?
Mr. D'Amelio.
Here.
Mr. Oliva.
Here.
Mr. McCluskey.
Here.
Mr. Siegel.
Here.
Mr. McCabe.
Here.
Mr. Holmes.
Here.
Mr. Wexler.
Here.
Mr. Quinn.
Here.
Dr. Hart.
Here. I'm going to ask the chief to lead us in the pledge, but after the pledge, I'd ask you to remain standing. Many of you know that former 5th Ward Commissioner Jeff Hyman was tragically killed last week in an auto accident. I'd like to have a moment of silence.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our first presentation tonight is by the EAC and Health Department for composting, Mr. Henry Eichmann. Background.
Oh, that would help. Thank you. Okay, let's back up. So in the April 2021 session, we had a citizen come back and ask why the composting ordinance that we enacted in 1992 only allowed for composting of grass and leaves, which was sort of contrary to what current practices are currently. And at that time, Dr. Hart reached out to us to have the EAC and the Health Board review the current ordinance and make some recommendations on how we could proceed so that the ordinance would represent what is currently being practiced and promoted by several departments in the township. So if you go to the next slide, this was just a quick summary of that, saying that only grass and leaves could be in this. And this was enacted in about 1992 because we had several complaints of odor generation and rodent population issues. A whole different era at that point, almost 30 years ago. And David, we advance the next one. So I want to give you an idea, and these slides that we are courtesy of the College of Agriculture, Penn State. So I didn't make them, they're pirated. Attorney, please don't take that. So what is composting? Basically, and most people do know what it is, it's mixing of different organic substances to make viable compost, which can be used in garden applications. And what are the best things for that? Garden, kitchen scraps, grass clippings, also potting soil, manure, sawdust, and hair. If we go to the next one. So what makes up composting? Essentially, you have materials that compost very quickly, which they call greens, and they rapidly decay. Anyone that's put grass clippings in the trash can and let them sit for a while, you know they get very hot and smelly, or in backyards, wherever. And the browns traditionally are things such as leaves and other things that actually will decompose fairly slowly. It's about usually you have about 3, on the volume basis, 3% or 3 to 1 browns to green. Browns can be leaves, straw, sawdust, animal beddings, and I put a little side note here, but for myself, all those commissioners that had anything to do with the chicken ordinance, this also could be included. As bedding and manure, that could be viable use. Greens, again, being vegetable scraps, coffee, grass clippings, and manures. If we advance to the next slide, please, on some of the common problems you'll have is odors, and this is also because it's just a bad mix made. Your putrid smell, rotten smell, and basically that means like if you had a high amount of grass in a mix, that you're going to get an ammonia smell or putrid smell. We go to the next slide. The other key thing that, at least in the health board, besides odor, these are the complaints the health board we get. The other would be potentially that you have pest problems with raccoons and other vermin potentially having a problem. Oops, jumped there. I'm sorry. So in many regards, there are 2 ways we can do this, and there'll be some recommendations. We had made a proposed ordinance that in most cases, people will probably not make piles. They'll be using some commercial type of bin or a bin that's contained. That helps with that. And composting and animal-proof type bin can cover it in that. Now, if we can, I'm sorry, Dave, could you advance to the next one? Part of this situation also in composting, which is a little different in our terms, is we're also worried about the municipal solid waste issues. Composting actually reduces that. And what we want to highlight here is I had some EPA data from 2018 saying most municipal waste, about 22% of municipal waste are these food and paper and cardboard things. Almost 40% could be composted potentially. That would reduce our tipping fees and that. So our overall cost would be benefit. We go to the next slide, Dave, I'm sorry. And this is what EPA says that was recycled in 2018, just approximately. You see no food there at all. Most of these paper and wine. So a lot of the issues that things that are recycled are not part of that. But if we go to the final slide from the EPA, this is what actually relates to us because we do burn for energy. So what we see there, what they're saying on the average is about 22% again going to food, paper and cardboard, and another actually yard clippings. Now, does this represent us directly? No, because we have a yard clipping type of process in that. But the overall situation is that composting could potentially be a significant reduction in our refuge costs in terms of the tipping fees. And I guess if you need any further thing, Dave's Community and Media has gone to a process now that they have a county-wide or a city-wide municipal thing, and maybe you can follow up with him in terms of those comments of how that program's going. So they're giving out yellow 5-gallon pails. We have a vendor called Mother Earth. It comes around and collects compostable materials in our township. Basically, those types of costs are $1 to $5. People are paying anywhere from $200 to $300 a year to have this taken away. And that's because of their concerns and their likes. But we go to the final thing, and this is something that Joy Baxter had helped us put together, but the composting diverts solid waste from the township trash, steam, and that, reducing CO2 and creating organizer. Backyard composting will save us money. Current practices being promoted and done by Haverford Township are not clearly defined within the current Haverford Town ordinance. simply because it restricts it to those two range streams of either grass and leaves. And so we do have a proposed ordinance that pretty defined it, a new, what we're also saying, a new ordinance that defines the components directly and with ongoing training, and we do have a number of composting seminars that are coming out by EAC or within the township itself, departments, is a win-win for us and the environment. Dave, I don't know if you have this proposed ordinance. Did you have that?
I don't have that.
Okay. I got the flash drive. Now, what is proposed? I don't know. Is it? Can you do that?
I can do that.
The under proposed.
Thank you.
Come prepared.
Electronics are great, but they the under proposed ordinance. And again, this is a draft of proposal, so if it's something that anyone has strong opinions or feelings for that we should be redirecting or putting in a different way. Again, so there is just a basic background saying that what composting is and the number of type of composting. If you come down, here's a little different than what is defined. So this is more a, hopefully a guide to the people that are composting too. It basically defines the browns, the green, microorganisms, and the things that should not be included, which makes it a little more defined than saying maybe grass, maybe that, and gives a better definition of it. And if we go down to, the next page, we have things like location. Now, these were things that were in the current ordinance. Construction, there's a dimension, and there's additional regulations. What we were also recommending, if someone has a small property, like a quarter acre, that it should not be a pile, maybe a composting bin, it makes more sense. In a small lot, a composting pile would not be practical. And these are just some guidelines. The violation and penalties were things that were pre-existing, but we also wanted to say that potentially that people had a chance of redress in terms of, they could be warned and advised how to improve that. Otherwise, again, then we go to the violation phase. But again, it's not being the violation. And that's basically all that we have to present, looking for input in terms of if you think this is viable. This is also, will eventually work, EAC is trying to work better define recyclable things, how to reduce our municipal waste. I think there's an earlier spring proposal about how the incinerator was having impact on the community. These are all directives that potentially that would help us out and move forward. Any questions or?
Actually, just to clarify for the audience, the point about changing our ordinance is to update it so that people that are composting right now aren't technically violating our law.
It's a gray area in terms of that. People say piles, but then bins. But in the ordinance, the existing ordinance talks about manufactured things.
And you get closer to the mic.
I'm sorry. The existing ordinance says piles and or manufactured type bins, which then could be construed that people using any kind of commercial bin that were not using either the grass or the leaves combination would be in technical violation. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but it's just a gray area and it's not well defined.
I do think that, I think it's a very good idea, and we're part of that program where we put out the little bin every 2 weeks.
Right.
It's astonishing how much stuff you can accumulate in that. We could use.
And
But I think it's very important, if we're going to change this ordinance, that we include with it, an educational program put up maybe on our social media and different pages to make clear that that it's really important that you take animal products out of that stream. I mean, and it sounds like a pain, but we used to sort our recycling, and it's really important that all meats, all fats, come out of those, come out of that stuff, because that will, not just attract rodents, but really can become. And so I think we should encourage people to do it, but I think we should also
And putting them
recognize
on-
our duty to educate.
Right, putting on my EAC hat, I think there are a lot of things that I've done a lot of investigation in terms of municipal solid waste, and there are a lot of areas that we can improve, and there are examples that are showing this, and potentially, besides being green, it also allows us to save money in terms of tipping fees, which seem to be going up exponentially as we talk.
The guidelines that are in the suggested ordinance, did they come from the EAC? Or they come from Penn State?
So two things happened. I got the basic Penn State things, and then we had several inputs from our EAC members that were composting that said that made sense. So these are all things that are well defined within the EPA or the DEP in terms of Penn State.
Yeah, I do think it's something we need to update this. It's somewhat like the chickens, that the chickens were here before the ordinance, and let's do it right, so.
Right. And again, unfortunately, had some people, even the lady that we work with, Joy Baxter, was saying that when she read that, and she's very active in her community doing composting with her church and her neighborhood, she said, I don't know if I'm in violation. Now, we're not all lawyers of that, but it just seemed very rigid what could be in it.
Great. Any other question? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
If there's any questions on that, please let us know. If there's direction, again, this is a draft out for thinking. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
The next item on the agenda is a presentation by our township engineer, Dave Pannoni, our MS4 report.
The board probably remembers, every year we have to do an MS4 update in public as part of the state requirements for the MS4 program. The MS4 program is the Municipal Storm Sewer System. That's what MS4 stands for. Since 2003, we've been permitted, we've had a MS4 permit as required by the state. This township's is now on their third permit. The first permit was a 10-year period, then 2 5-years. We're in year 3 of the third permit. This current permit will expire in March of 23. As part of the current permit, and again, the board may remember, we made a presentation, a major change in the last round of permits was that a pollution reduction plan was required. The state's going to require ultimately the 10% reduction in sediment that's currently being discharged to Darby Creek and Cobbs Creek be implemented by March of 24. Oh, I'm sorry, by April of 2024. And the way we're proposed to do that is by a stream bank restoration. That's in the current permit. The program requires 6 minimum control measures that the township participate in every year. Public education and outreach. Actually, coincidentally, read the newsletter today while I was eating dinner, and we had our public education outreach in there about fertilization on the lawns. A solicit public involvement and participation, an illicit discharge detection and elimination program, construction site runoff, post-construction runoff control, and pollution prevention, municipal good housekeeping, public works, handling their salt and everything. Township should be very proud they've been in compliance from day one with the program. With one exception, there was a a violation in year one. Every municipality in Pennsylvania received a violation. It was all administrative. After year one, we've been in compliance the whole time. We're also active in the Delaware County Stormwater Collaborative. Stormwater information is available to the general public on our website. We have 163 outfalls before this permit's complete, the year 3 permit. We, on behalf of the township, will inspect every outfall, all 163. And if we notice anything that could possibly be illicit, we would then test it. Last round, we did not notice anything illicit, by odor or taste, or not taste, odor or visually that could look illicit, and we would test it. One last point, very interesting, the township. If the board might remember, about 15 years ago when we updated our stormwater management ordinance, we established a BMP inspection and maintenance fund. So any stormwater management facility that's been built in the township, whether privately or built privately and dedicated to us, we have a fund for the inspection, and for the ones we own, the maintenance of the facilities. Working with Dave and Amy, we're inspected about a third of those systems. There's over 100 of them in the last month, and we intend to inspect probably the balance of them by the end of the year. That's a good aggressive program. It's working well. We inspect them. We identify anything that requires maintenance or any kind of a modification. And that is the update. If the board has any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a discussion of the final application for the ARPA program. This is the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. The township, this was an act passed by Congress earlier this year, somewhat in response to the COVID pandemic. The township was awarded approximately $9 million a couple of months ago. We had discussed at our last meeting possibly how to allocate that. We did ask the public for feedback, and I wonder if we could summarize some of the feedback we got.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. If you don't mind, I'm going to do it from my seat here just because I have documents that I might need to refer to. So as we just discussed at the July 12th meeting, we announced the funding that we had received from the federal government through the American Rescue Plan Act. It's a total of about $19.8 million, of which we received 9.9 this past May, and we'll receive the balance of 9.9 next May. So part of the process is to solicit public input as to the use of those funds. During last month's presentation, we gave a proposed framework that is on the screen above, with approximately 3% going to health and future health emergency, 33% going to assist negative economic impacts, primarily with the business district, services to disproportionately impacted communities, premium pay, infrastructure, revenue replacement, and administrative costs. They are the categories that have been given to us by the Treasury Department. Most of the ones in the first 4 categories, if I'm looking at it correctly, first 4, really have to deal with negative financial impacts from COVID. Once we get into the infrastructure, there's a little bit more latitude. We can do stormwater, sanitary sewer, broadband improvements that can be township-wide. The revenue loss, that is a calculation that the Treasury Department gave to every government in the United States. It's a specific calculation of how much monies we can retain to use, with a lot more flexibility depending on the circumstances of that particular city or local government. So we have proposed, while we were allowed to keep about 3.5, we're only proposing to keep 2, to keep most of it in the infrastructure and business community needs, and then a small percentage to go to administrative. As some of the programs, we will need assistance to administer them, just really with the volume of analysis that's going to have to be done. So that was what we had proposed during the meeting last month. And as I said, we did solicit public opinion. We announced it at the meeting. We announced it on the website, on social media, and we did a constant contact email distribution on the 19th too. I believe, Dave, maybe 3,000 people are on that list, something like that. So we did try to get the word out. As of the deadline on Friday, we received 16 comments, and I would just like to summarize them. I will not read them verbatim. As I told some of the people who had given comments, they did not want to be identified, but I'm going to summarize as best I can. Improvements to road conditions on state roads such as Brookline Boulevard, Darby Road, Westchester Pike, and Eagle Road. In the business district, support for aesthetic improvements, purchase of properties to improve parking or create a more central town center, purchase of sidewalk easements to create better pedestrian experiences, improved walkability along Buck Lane, improvements to Preston Park and parks in general, including the planting of more trees, to provide assistance to those financially impacted, as there are still many individuals and businesses and not-for-profits still suffering from economic losses. Some residents required about the meaning of disproportionately impacted communities. Some asked for improvement to school air quality and curriculum. Some asked for better maintenance of general public infrastructure, including road paving, potholes, planting, reduce or replace signage, especially redundant signage on streets, parks, and ball field renovations. Stormwater improvements, especially mentioned was area along Eagle between Lawrence and Darby. There was a request to establish our own health department and provide financial incentives for vaccinations, along with public information campaigns promoting vaccinations. There was a request to use money to reduce property taxes, installation of Wi-Fi in public areas such as parks, commercial districts, and bus stops. There was a request to forgive a loan to one of our fire companies. There was a request to provide funding to the Haverford Township Adult School. Request to have a commercial facade improvement program, a township-wide curb replacement program. There was a request to plant trees to improve the tree canopy throughout the township. There was a request to install streetlights in select business areas, a request for a consultant to study the best usage of the Haverford Triangle area, including the former township building. There was a request to hire a horticultural manager within the Public Works Department to maintain and manage public gardens. There was a request to acquire additional space in the Oakmont district for additional parking. There was a request to provide financial assistance for rent and utilities and continue the food collection program we did to address food insecurities. And that is the summary of the 16. Now, some of them are a little obvious, we can just say off the bat. We are limited into what we can do on the state roads, many of the state roads. School districts in particular received funding on their own, so they can do with it as they see appropriate and fit. And some of the programs that were discussed, we did discuss a little bit, and they were in our plan too, such as business facades and help to businesses and such. So this was an important part of the program to solicit public opinion. So that's what we did. We do have a report coming up to Treasury at the end of August. And one of the questions is, what did we do to solicit that public input? So these are the processes that we did is what we're going to be reporting to Treasury.
Thank you. Anybody have any comments?
Well, just to reiterate for the public that when this money is actually spent, whatever the projects are, as long as it meets the thresholds in terms of value, it still comes before this board for individual votes. This is really us setting up the guidelines that Dave and Amy and the rest of the administration are then going to apply and then bring back to us individually for votes. We'll be voting on this stuff probably for the next, given that there's more money coming in the spring. We're going to be voting on this stuff over the next 2 years, but there'll be time for individual discussions as each comes up as well.
That is correct. Now, we are close on 1 or 2 programs that we would like to bring before you sooner rather than later. One may be ready for next week. We are fine-tuning 1 or 2 of them. I think the first priority was a program that would benefit the business community in general. I can just announce in general because it will be coming before you, as you said, for your approval. We believe we're going to do that through a resolution to authorize the programs. You will see the criteria, but in general, we were discussing a $2,500 grant to businesses within Haverford Township that are either headquartered here or have a physical presence here, as long as they can demonstrate a certain level of revenue loss, similar to what the calculation is that we had to show Treasury. A simple, relatively simple program. We want to get that money to the businesses that need it. And while we acknowledge that $2,500 would not solve anybody's financial issues, it might soften something in somebody's business. I'm sure they'd appreciate it. So that was one program that we are close to coming to the board with, to ask for authorization. We also have just investigated for that program in particular. We would most likely have our business tax collector administer it, since they would have access to business tax returns and have that data right at their fingertips. So they would be able to cross-check any applications that we got from a particular business.
Thank you. Yeah, the suggestions were great. Again, the capital projects need to be related to wastewater, stormwater, and broadband. So those are a lot of the suggestions which are certainly needed are not things that we can spend these funds on. Okay, thank you, Amy.
And just to take into account, you know, if we spend $3,250,000 on stormwater and other types of sewer projects, those are projects that are going to have to get done one way or the other. So that's
Right.
money that we would have had to spend anyway.
We get things done a little faster this way. Okay, moving on to next week, we will have appointments of 4 entry-level police officers. We will have more, the finance department, more settlement and stipulations of counsel, which we've been going through for the last several months. An ordinance P7 2021 will be amendments to the shade tree ordinance, the first reading. This is something the Shade Tree Commission requested some changes to our ordinance almost 3 years ago, especially in regards to eliminating the tree exclusion zone and land development projects. And they also requested that an ordinance clarify tree replacement formula and establishment of procedures for properties that don't meet the criteria for replacing trees. Last summer, an updated ordinance was presented to the board. A number of commissioners had concerns about the ordinance impact on our golf courses, and changes have been made in the new ordinance that I believe address those concerns, along with the removal of the tree exclusion zone and a addition of a tree replacement formula. The ordinance much more clearly defines what a public shade tree is, clarifies language in regards to maintaining these trees, what can and cannot be done. Our current ordinance is somewhat confusing. At times it requires residents to maintain trees over sidewalks but at the same time requires them to get a permit to do that work. I think the new ordinance eliminates the need for the permit. Worked pretty extensively over the last year with Mr. Berman, Mr. Pannoni, and the Shade Tree Commission on the new ordinance. If anyone has questions or comments. Moving on, there'll be a ordinance number P11 2021. It's the second reading of a traffic ordinance. Ordinance number P12 2021, refunding of the 2016 general obligation bond. I don't know if Mr. Holmes, do you have any comments?
No different than what we talked about a month ago, and once this second reading happens, then we can then actually do the bond sale.
It actually is scheduled for the 10th, assuming that the ordinance passes on the 9th, but it is scheduled for the 10th. We had our Moody's call last Friday, and we will get our rating tomorrow. So. and share that with everybody next Monday.
We'll expect good news.
Thank you. Ordinance number P13, 2021 is another second reading of a traffic ordinance. Ordinance number P14, 2021 was to be additions to the historic home survey. We did have a public meeting prior to tonight's meeting. That meeting is going to be continued until September, so we will not be discussing this next week. I don't know if anybody has any comments right now. It will be discussed, the public meeting will be on September 13th prior to our September regular commissioners meeting. Ordinance number P15, 2021, streets and sidewalks, first reading. No,
That's a proposal to modify that ordinance to better address for the township utility companies working in the township. It'll help us improve the surface of the roads as more and more work gets done by the utility companies.
Well, I think that's a great idea.
does anyone else have any comments on that? Requires the companies to do significantly more work at any given time.
Yeah, to be clear, currently the residents see in many areas where the utility companies will, when they're finished their work, do half the road, mill and overlay. And we are proposing that the Board of Commissioners adopt this ordinance that would require a full width mill and overlay from the utility companies.
I think that's about half the calls that we get are about that stuff.
Ordinance number P17, 2021 is another traffic ordinance, the first reading. Resolution number 2228, 2021 is the Delco Green Space and Trails grant application for Brookline. Eileen Matola, I wonder if you could comment on that from Parks Department.
The Park Department, the Park Board, and local residents, neighbors of the Brookline School are getting together. There's going to be a meeting next week. It's a quick turnaround for the grant. It's due September 13th, and they're going to look into it to see what we could do possibly at the Brookline School.
Thank you. I think we just learned of this pretty recently, so there is a quick turnaround, and that's 2 weeks ago, right?
Correct.
So-
And the other thing is, there is no match to this grant, so were we to get it, we could use that money and maybe get another grant that could be the match to.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
We'll also adopt the 2022 budget adoption schedule for November and December meetings. The several contract awards, our 2021 and 2022 salt contract, a carrier chilling system at the stadium. This is needed because one of the chillers broke down, I think, in last month, and it needs to be replaced. Contract award for repair of the Niter Hall chimney and stucco. And I believe that's all we have.
Dr. Hart, can I make one announcement, please?
Sure.
Tomorrow night is the National Night Out. It's August 3rd at 6 p.m., aimed at raising awareness of crime prevention and drug prevention. And so that's coordinated locally by the police department, but also by the National Association of Town Watch throughout the nation. That's over at the Lowe's parking lot, correct, Chief?
That's correct. 6 to 9 at the Lowe's parking lot, yes.
Thank you. Anyone have any comments?
Last month's meeting, my perspective, on leave the state release. I would like this board to consider passing a resolution Senate Bill 598 eliminate the preemption and will allow local municipalities by ordinance to regulate whether individuals bring weapons into municipal buildings. Right now, only place that can prohibit it is the state legislature, where the General Assembly is, and our state courts. And I think this bill, and if there are similar bills, would help address that, because we have no ability here to regulate who comes in or what they carry with. And I would suggest that we need to at least demonstrate our support for such legislation.
Yeah, I think if you've put together that resolution, we can vote on that next week.
Will do.
Anyone else have any comment? Have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We adjourn.